Good morning, world. Hopefully, you heard a little bit of Hail to the Chief. And if you didn't, hope it's ringing in your ears. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And on this show, greeting you live from the All America city of Mooresville, North Carolina, we talk about what's going on in the world, political division, disruption in America, the threat of nuclear war now that Putin has actually threatened nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Continue our discussion of climate change as hurricanes once again hit the coast of Cuba and Florida, and what the world will be like in a post-COVID economy. With war in Ukraine, rising gas prices, well, not in the US, inflation all across the board, turbulence and disruption. But today I want to bring my monologue with a huge day in my life as I finally made it into the White House. Last Thursday, I participated in the North Carolina Community Days of Action, Building a Better North Carolina. This was a roundtable and a 4-hour work session with leaders from around North Carolina, where we listened to cabinet level leaders in the White House, from Gene Sperling, who manages the ARP program, to Mitch Landrieu, Senior Advisor to the President on Infrastructure, from Keisha Lance Bottoms, former mayor of Atlanta and senior advisor to the president, and our very own North Carolinian Michael Regan, who served as our Secretary of Environmental and Department of Environmental Quality, but now is the EPA administrator. I also had the honor of meeting Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman of the United States, and had a very enlightening discussion with him on the explosive growth of the Indian American community, given the fact that his wife, the first female vice president, is from a family whose mother grew up in Tamil Nadu in India, where my dad grew up, Shamala Rajagopalan. And it was an amazing day. We talked about the infrastructure and ARP plan and specific investments that the Biden administration has been making in clean energy, in healthcare, in broadband. North Carolina is receiving $2.2 billion of ARP funding. There are over 512,000 households who will receive broadband internet because of this funding. And I was able to talk a little bit about smart cities and innovation and my theory of making North Carolina a smart state, and how other cities around the country could also embark on the same things that even Mooresville did. We ourselves received $8 million of ARP funding, $4.4 million we're using this year, and a couple $100,000 we invested in our own smart city initiatives. It was an enlightening day, a day that I will remember probably for the rest of my life. Being at the White House is special. Being inside the White House, working with leaders and cabinet officials, is even more special. I got a sense of the history. I felt emotional as I walked the halls in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, where other cabinet leaders worked, and the West Wing, where we saw leaders in the White House. It was amazing. An amazing day to celebrate American democracy at the highest level, but also challenges for the White House now as we face the upcoming elections in November, which are only 5 weeks away. And we'll debate and talk about my visit, get your perspective, as I also visited the Hill and the Senate. And I want to give you some of my opinions about what I've noticed different about Washington. This is the first time I've gone back in a few years, but a very, very interesting day. So I achieved one trip on my bucket list, a trip in the White House. And I must tell you, I came back feeling inspired, confident, and yes, a bit surprised to my brothers and sisters and my family, who never thought that they would see a strapping young boy from Charleston, West Virginia, set himself inside the White House for a working meeting. It gets just to show you, Mom, anything can happen if you put your mind to it. Now, let's get started. Today we have with us Mark Lee, Nick Paladiva,
Glad to be here with you. I
Yeah.
know Nick's going to be joining us as well. Glad that you got a chance to make that trip to DC. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine recently about the trips to DC because we were actually reflecting on past presidents and current presidents and who might be president and all along those lines. So, in that sense, we were actually having a conversation about Obama, and I was actually at that first inauguration with Obama and DC, that first one, and was actually looking forward to it and looking forward to a great conversation that folks were going to have in that sense. And then I heard some speculation, which we'll hear on the remixing of Politics and Culture, one of the other shows that we've got with Pam Purifoy, and she'll be here on the network at 4 p.m. with her show. But there is some speculation. I'd love to hear what Chris's thoughts about this are, that among the presidential candidates from the Democratic side are two folks that definitely are not very conservative, and they are definitely not moderate in any sense of the word either, because I'm hearing some speculation about both AOC and Gavin Newsom running for president. So I'm wondering whether Chris thinks that that is a possibility and whether he thinks that that is something that the Democrats should be excited about, or maybe they should be scared about. Because like I said, neither one of those are moderates, and they definitely are have a base, but they also are kind of an alienating factor to many folks, because many folks are afraid of some of their policies and some of their politics and all along those lines, because they definitely in some ways have some politics that are a little bit more to the far liberal and the far left side and all along those lines. But I'm just wondering, do you think that they are maneuvering to possibly run for a White House office? Maybe like Steve's going to run as well at some point or another. But I was wondering your thoughts around that.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about White House office, but for me, I got excited about possibly working at the White House. I mean, I felt so. I don't know what it was. I just felt so
Seduced.
to be in there and to be a part of such a historic place. But it does come with. It's not all grits and glory. I mean, it is a hard place to work. 12 to 14-hour days, I hear, and probably would give up a lot of the flexibility I enjoy. But you never know.
Potomac fever. Steve,
What?
you're getting Potomac fever, they call it.
But real quickly, before I get into that, Mark, I did want to just share some insight before we dive into a little bit of what I learned from the meeting. I'm going to be working on some after articles for WRL and the press, and I'm waiting to hear from some of, we heard from Wake County commissioners, Sig Hutchison, about projects in Wake County. We heard from the mayor of Charlotte on things that they're working on. Skip Alston, the chair of Guilford County Commissioners, I think was there, or Mayor Vaughn from Greensboro, and the person from the food bank, Interfaith Food Shuttle. So there were different leaders, and I had been invited to speak to the press, so I missed the panel that Michael Regan was actually speaking on. So I'm hoping they send me a recording. But one thing I'll notice before I went to Washington, I want to give you guys, and then I want to dive into like just some of the things that we talked about. But the bottom line is that, and then at the end of the show, we'll talk a little bit about nuclear war. We want to get Chris Greco's opinion about Putin's threat of nuclear weapons. I want to talk a little about Hurricane Ian, and it's about to land in Florida. Right. But what I noticed differently this time, and I'm going to start with just an insight, and I want to get your observations, is, 30 years ago when I worked in Washington or have been there, the money was far away from the city. You did have to raise money, but the numbers of money wasn't that much. But now, not too far from the Rayburn building, which you can see on East Street, there's a place that I went to called 411 Capitol Place. And that's rented out to Congress leaders who come there to do their call time to raise money. And then right on that strip of street, you have lobbying receptions. So literally you saw Congress leaders leaving the Congress, coming in for a reception and going back. It really dawned upon me that a big problem in American politics is that the money is just too close to the people making the decisions. And I'm not targeting the Republicans, but I think this is a Democratic problem as well. And it's taking so much money to get reelected, but then you're caving into the special interests. So I just want to get your insight. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but to see it visibly I just feel like it'd be better for them not to be able to raise money while they're in session, because I think it does leave a bad taste in my mouth. I'm going to start with you, Chris, and then Nick and Mark, just about that insight before we talk about my White House visit.
The politicians, as you know, Steve, will take every opportunity to do anything that they can do to be able to show themselves as supporters of whatever the issue is at that point in time. There was when I was a commander in Pennsylvania up near Wilkes-Barre, and Air Force commander, and all of a sudden we had this Memorial Day parade. Or Veterans Day parade, and where were we? The commander of the Army unit and the commander of my unit, me, we were right next to the politician. And I said after that, I said, I'm never going to do that again, because basically that was an endorsement of that politician. And I said, we can't do that as military people. We can't. And the thing is, they'll take every opportunity to make that work. And fundraising, my God, you're right. I mean, Steve, if you don't fundraise, you're not going to get elected. And that's a sad part. And Lee says that every single time on this show. And I said, how much have you raised, Lee? He says, nothing, Chris, because I don't believe in raising that money to be able to do things that I need to do. And then I'm beholden to the people that gave me that money. And that is absolutely true. Nick will tell you. I mean, and Steve, maybe you've been lucky. Maybe you've had the ability to be able to be a politician without beholding yourself to individuals that have given you money. But I'm telling you,
money. Even the city council level, I've had to raise money, and I have a committee. I'm actually going to be raising some money next month just to put together. Sometimes I self-fund a lot of my stuff I work on, but that's the part of the government. That's the part of the government that I like. That I'm not having to raise millions of dollars. So actually, the one thing I love about being a city councilor is that I'm able to see the results of my work. And obviously, I've been building enough of a brand to be invited to events at the White House, being a moderator of a global TV show like this and doing other things. But that is an interesting question. I'm going to go to you, Nick, and then I want to spend a few minutes on the White House event. Once I get more information from them, we'll probably talk about them more. I'm working on a newsletter about it next week. But what are your thoughts about what I said? Not telling you anything you don't already know, but going there and seeing it visibly is even harder because the decisions are being made so close to the money.
Yeah, Steve, I was a member for several years of NAFA-PAC. A lot of people don't know that. It's a political action committee. It's the 12th largest, at least at that time, PAC in the United States. And it was basically the National Association of Insurance Financial Services political action committee. And what we did, we had every year, we had a week on the Hill, they called it, where you went to Congress and you lobbied congressmen. That's how I had my picture taken with Senator Burr, Senator Tillis. I met some of the other Congress people as well as the U.S. senators. And what we did is we handed out checks ranging from $1,500 to $600,000 to congressmen. Now, what we were doing is lobbying them not to tax the inside value of a life insurance contract. I mean, it was kind of stupid, but that's what we did. Then when I served on the committee in North Carolina, what we did is we handed out checks again to politicians. We didn't have any real strings attached. In other words, we didn't give them the check, hey, please don't do it. What we would do is say, hey, come to our meeting. And then our meeting, we would discuss don't tax the inside build of a life insurance policy. Then we'd hand them a check. It was kind of, it is what it is in the American system. And the problem is what Chris has pointed out and you point out, you must raise money to get elected because you need to buy advertising, radio spots, newspaper spots, and that all costs money. So this is really how our system works today. I even had clients that were registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they made huge amounts of money. It is definitely a money system. Now, you can be cynical and call it corrupt, or you can just say, hey, it is what it is out there. Is that if you're going to be in politics, you know that, Steve. It's almost like from day one, first thing first, you got to start raising money for your campaign or you're not going anywhere. So that's the American system that exists today. I don't see it changing anytime in the near future.
Yeah, it's just it's amazing. And, I think that, Mark, I'm going to go to you and then I'm going to dive in a little bit of the meeting and then we're going to talk about some other things going on the road. I will end today with a tribute to Roger Federer, but I may begin my monologue tomorrow about Roger because I think we want to talk about his career and we might have to spend more than one day, but I'll close out with Roger Federer. But you've seen this, Mark, in North Carolina. Mark and Nick both. I mean, we're seeing ads every day from Ted Budd. We're seeing ads from Beasley. We've seen an increase in Ted Budd negative ads, a few positive ones about gun rights. What I find interesting is not much connection to Trump in these ads. Budd really seems to be running more of an independent campaign focused on three things: guns rights, selling Beasley as an insider, corrupt politician, which I think is a bit of a stretch, being the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and also talk about inflation and rising prices, and that it's all Biden's fault, and he's going to get our country back to solvency. So, do you think that these ads turn these elections one way or the other, Mark, or do you just turn the TV off? I mean, obviously, why would they do them if they didn't work?
I mean, a lot of times they do work and they are geared toward specific drawing of specific crowds and everything. And we can't just say, like you said earlier, that it's the Republicans only or the Democrats only. It is definitely both sides of the political aisle, because I have seen ads that have mentioned things around gun rights or around education or around other things. But I've also seen some ads that are very much trying to get the women's out to vote, and they are targeting kind of the Roe versus Wade conversation and all along those lines. Because I've even seen some ads where they have brought up the map of where things may be changing if you don't get certain people in office and all along those lines. And I'm thinking that there's some other ads that are specifically being targeted toward the various minority communities, and particularly those that are Latin American, particularly when there are certain governors from certain states that have been transporting people to different states that are more democratically based and all along those lines. So definitely, I do think that these ads are specifically trying to get out a target market. Now, whether they work or whether they frustrate people, that is a whole nother question, because I do know that sometimes people get very frustrated and very ad mad at those kind of ads, because they're going like, I'm going to make my decision based on my own values, my own viewpoints and things along those lines. And you're not going to lack of a better term, coerce me into voting one way or another based on your kind of painting of a negative picture. Because I have seen these ads definitely take an issue and kind of color the issue in a very negative aspect. One of the most notorious cases, which I know Chris knows very well, and I know it very well, is the way that they painted Dukakis with some of the things around Willie Horton and things in that area, because of his what he had done with a convicted criminal and some of the decisions that he made, and they made it seem like he was soft on crime. That was kind of part of what the argument was, and in some ways, many people would say that it was effective because he did not win the office that he was seeking and all of that. So this is not anything new in that sense. So it's been going on for a while. When it comes to the money, there is a whole conversation, and I know Sasha sometimes brings it up about what is the difference between regular donations that regular citizens give and that even regular organizations and regular businesses give, and what some people likely like to call, but not so lightly, dark money, which is kind of this money that is geared toward specifically influencing an election, and is usually made by folks that have a significant amount of money to do said things. And that's on both sides. I mean, most of the ones that folks know that I'm aware of are people like the Koch brothers, even though one of the Koch brothers has passed. So I guess it's just Koch brother now. But definitely it's those kind of organizations that they have specifically got the money to target and try to get the election's influence. So they have, millions, if not billions, in their coffer. And that is what some people are very frustrated by, because they're going like, can you basically buy a politician and buy an election? And there are some folks that would argue that you might be able to do that in these modern day times. I hope not. But, I'm also realistic when I see that kind of money being spread. And Chris, I'm not saying that it's only spread by the Republican side, because we do know that there are Democratic organizations that are operating like that as well. So I would like to see some of that money get out of politics, but that's just my own personal bias and view in that sense. I've actually because we've got a veterans meeting, to turn myself off for a second and pop on off, but I will be back because I've got to open a basement door, because definitely you got to make sure that the veterans can get into a space if you don't have the right buzzers and all along those lines. So you got to make sure that they are able to get into to their meeting, and I'm sure that Chris will appreciate that. So that means that I got to make sure that somebody that is handicapped can actually access this particular building. But I do promise
Thank you.
I'll be back.
Before we shift over to Sasha, because I want him to give some opinions about Ukraine and nuclear weapons and the statements by Putin. I'll just end with this, but we're going to come back to it. So during the meeting, what I found interesting during this White House meeting, many of the advisors to the president are former mayors. Mitch Landrieu, who is the former mayor of New Orleans, who now pretty much is the infrastructure coordinator. Keisha Lance Bottoms, I think, mayor of Atlanta. She was a senior advisor to the president. You have Michael Regan, who was the Secretary of Environment for North Carolina, but he is the EPA administrator. But what I do commend the White House for in this meeting is working with local governments who are the people putting the money to use, which I found to be very interesting. And at the end of the day, we talked about healthcare, we talked about clean energy, we talked about broadband, we talked about internet, we talked about the continued work and the fact that their intent is to make a difference in American lives. Of course, critics of the ARP plan, like Ted Budd, are going to say that it just costs too much money. Biden's student relief plan is going to cost, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, billions of dollars. So, but I wanted to throw that out there. We're going to come back for that discussion to have healthy debate about how much money is too much money, or do you think that the ARP plan was something that we had to do? But let's go to Sasha Starr real quick. Sasha, a lot of people very scared, on edge with Premier Putin threatening nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Could you give us a quick update on what you think of this? And you're taking us back to like Cuban Missile Crisis, and people are now going back to the days that we had bunkers, but then also quick update on the war in Ukraine.
Next month will be 50 years since the Caribbean crisis. It was averted, and two key people who played the role in that are well-known: President John Kennedy and Russian General Secretary Nikita Khrushchev. But there are some unknown heroes who made the preservation of peace possible. There are two Russians, the Petrov, who was alerted by a missile launched from US, and he had to report it to higher officials in Russian army about that. But then he checked it one more time, and instead of reporting right away, and then he figured out that that was actually a reflection of the sunrise. And he reported that nothing really important happened, that he must alert his superiors, and it went by. And another one is Arkhipov, who was commander of the Russian submarine, and who was told that the American submarine just launched an attack torpedo against a Russian submarine, and Russian submarine therefore has to launch all-out nuclear missiles. And he was one who fought that order and did not allow that to happen. Maybe there are some unsung heroes on the U.S. side. I'm not aware of that. I will not deny it, neither confirm that there are. What makes this one is different from 62? You see, in 62, in Russia, they were people with great experience in diplomatic service, education, moral facilities, moral qualities required for these positions where they were. And even then, this crisis could go either way, as we know. Today's Russia, they have a mafia-like government. They are all professional bandits. So you cannot expect any rational decisions from them. So we are all now, the only thing is that at that time in the Caribbean crisis, we were talking about nuclear ballistic missile and all-out war. Now there is talk about tactical nuclear weapons, which do not necessarily escalate into all-out nuclear war, because U.S. has enough sophisticated weapons, non-nuclear means to inflict incredible damage to the Russian army. And so that's actually been conveyed to Mr. Putin and his friends. If they can understand something, if they're not 100% bandits who will just do anything what they want. The only thing is Putin is in a situation no way out. Either outcome is equally bad for him. Some are even worse than others, but they're all equally bad. And this man, the sooner people will come out, would be better.
Before we get to some other issues, I'm going to go to Chris Greco and ask him, and come back to you, Sasha and Mark. What is now the reaction of the U.S.? I mean, when we came to a resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was kind of, the prisoner's dilemma, the zero-sum game, knowing that Putin's probably calling our bluff. But how do we take this kind of a threat? Chris, as a military analyst on the show, what do you think the United States will do? I mean, we can't take action and retaliate with nuclear weapons.
First of all, let's calm down. This is a media-inflicted panic, Steve. Media-inflicted. Putin never used the words nuclear. He never used that word. Never used that word. What he did was he said use any means at our disposal to protect Russia. He never said he was going to attack NATO. He never said he was going to attack Ukraine. He never said anything. But let's just all agree to disagree on that one. And then let's move on to what's going to happen. So I heard that the Canadian Minister of Defense today basically say, we're going to probably decline to react should he use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So and she's French. She's French Canadian. In fact, I noticed that with Canada. They have all their people as French Canadians. The Minister of Defense, the Minister of whatever. I mean, so it's like, okay, so they're kind of French type people. But basically, she's saying, well, we really feel that this would be really a bad situation, but we're just, we're kind of just going to sense it out and do whatever we need to do whatever. So Canada's not going to react to that. America's not going to react to it because basically we have a president who is useless. This individual, the only thing he can do is shove money at people. Shoves $54 billion at Ukraine. Good for him and good for the Ukrainian fighters. But you know something? He's not going to react either. He's done this red line crap before. So basically, they're going to, and let me tell you something. They're not going to do this. The Soviets, the Russians, which are really Soviets, they're not going to do what they need to do. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to do this referendum, this kangaroo court referendum they're going to do in Donetsk and Luhansk, right? And they're going to, and there's going to like a 90% overwhelming, yes, we want to be part of Russia. So all of a sudden they're going to annex this thing. And then they're going to say, you attack Luhansk or Donetsk, if America is going to do that through proxy with Ukraine, then we're going to consider that to be an aggression against Russia. And now we get to attack NATO. And the U.S. is going to back off of that. They're going to I'm telling you, Steve, they're going to back off because we don't have the guts to sit there and say, something. You put one missile, I don't give a crap if it's nuclear or non-nuclear, into NATO territory, and we swear to God that you are going to end up eating glass. And Kennedy was really good at that. And also you have to remember that this was totally different from the 60-year-old Cuban Missile Crisis because it was mainly naval power against naval power. And that was actually a good show because basically the U.S. naval power, they blockaded Cuba, and any ship that went past that was basically going to get fired upon. So I think the Russian sailors, the Soviet sailors, were ready to go with that. They were like, screw you, we're going to fire back. And I think that the politicians, and I think you're right, Sasha, with that one. I think the diplomats finally said, you know something, we're not going to take this that far. We're going to go ahead and back off of that. And it was a big win for Kennedy, with good, solid advisors. He had some really, really good advisors, Steve, on that one. I don't know about Biden's advisors.
There's a movie called 13 Days.
Hold on a
Maybe you want
second.
to see the movie 13 Days again. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just one of the things I was going to bring up, and I was just going to bring it up earlier because Sasha brought it up, and I'm going to come back to that conversation. No insult to you, Steve, because I know you are in that political lane, and definitely I have great respect for you as other politicians that I know here in this area. But when we're talking about the money and some of the lobbies that exist and everything, I don't think that we can make that mafia comparison only with Russian politicians and everything, because I would argue that there are quite a few politicians, even in America, this lovely country and this lovely democracy that we live in, that are also influenced and controlled just like a mafia as well. So I definitely think that there are some bought and paid for politicians, and that gives us kind of a mafia standpoint as well. And some of these corporate heads have that mentality also. So this whole mafia mentality, I think, is worldwide. And I definitely think that even if it's not the direct mafia controlling them, it is a mafia-like mentality, whether it's in Russia or whether it's in the US, because I definitely think that there is some influences in the government that need to be out of government. And definitely they have got too strong of a stronghold, whether it is in the West or the East or any parts of the world, because we definitely know that there are some territorial leaders in other parts of the world, like Africa and Asia, that are also being influenced by some serious corruption. So let's be very clear. Corruption is running rampant throughout the world and all along those lines. And I don't think that we can just put it only on the Russian political system, because I think it also exists here and in other parts of the world as well. So would you disagree with me on that, Chris? Like I said, I was just having a conversation with the veterans. So they're here, and I was talking to one of them, and he was telling me that he is very frustrated by the way that we treat our veterans here in the United States. Maybe they treat them better there in Canada and other parts of the world, but he just came back from a veterans appointment. It took him forever to get his treatment, and he was not too pleased with that. And he actually worked for the VA at one time or another, and they've got this whole water kind of thing that's going on in Camp Lejeune. And he said the 14 ailments that they have put out there, it's many more than that. So he said that, they're talking about 14 is more than that.
I agree with you. I've talked to my buddies in Canada, the veterans of Canada, and I'll tell you, they have really come up from the standpoint of treating veterans well. I think they've done a great job at that. I mean, and I'm not saying the U.S. doesn't have the capability; they do. And I think that that's where a lot of things we have to take a look at and say, but comparative to when I first got out in the 1990s, and even comparative to when people got out in Vietnam after the Vietnam War, much better treatment at the VA than at that time. But it can always improve. It could always get better. But yes. I'll tell you, the Canadian medical aspect, what they've been doing, is really come up within the last 20 years, 15, 20 years. Man, Canadian medical aspect is really good. I mean, they used to always come down here to the US for treatments on different aspects. Now it's reversing. People are actually going to Canada, which is like, it's like, wow, that's really a reversal from that standpoint. So hopefully we'll get better.
I'm going to go over just a couple of things going on politically, but then get to some other things going on in the world. But first of all, congressional leaders released a stopgap funding proposal to avert a government shutdown, but they're going to do another $12 billion aid to Ukraine. Kristen Sinema defended the filibuster. An independent analysis found that President Biden's debt relief could cost $400 billion, or roughly 2%. And going to the international, and also Ron DeSantis, the migrant flight thing keeps going on. Is it a rivalry between him and the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott? Cuba is going to allow same-sex couples to marry, and Giorgia Meloni is now the premier of Italy, and not sure what that means in terms of Russia's strategy from that part of the world. I think it's sort of split. 15 people were killed in a school shooting in the Russian city of Ivansk, and Vladimir Putin has granted citizenship to Edward Snowden, leaked highly classified NSA documents, who fled the U.S. in 2013. And Hurricane Ian has made landfall in Cuba early this morning. And we're going to talk about other things around the world. Nigerian Independence Day is coming up, I think, this weekend. So I'll be attending that event and saying a few words. But anyway, just a quick wrap up. I just wanted to get to some of the international and national issues, and not sure if there's any insight you all want to bring on anything I've discussed.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's talk
Steve.
about Edward Snowden for a second here, Steve.
Yeah.
That freaking coward, that traitor, that son of a pup that ended up, taking the. I'll tell you, he's a perfect partner for Putin. I'm glad they made him a Russian citizen. You know that? You know what Putin ought to do with that son of a pup? They had to take him and they had to conscript him, put him in Ukraine. In fact, make him a general. Make him a general, and just so that he's targeted. I'll tell you, and you guys just don't. And I get it. You don't understand, and it's all right. I saw the info. I was there at NSA when this guy basically absconded with all this material. And let me tell you something. You're worried about Trump. You're worried about Trump. Oh, look at all the material he had. Look at all the material Snowden took. He took tons of material, and he put them on flash drives and DVDs. He put them in some cloud computer where nobody knows where they are, and he's feeding them to Putin. The only reason he's still alive is because he is able to tell Putin what we're doing. And I'm talking sources and methods and crap like that. This guy needs to be, Sasha, I agree. Putin is a nutbag, and to have Snowden as his number one probably intelligence guy, yeah, that's perfect. Conscript him, put him out of the front lines. Hey, give him a weapon. In fact, give him the same weapons you're giving the frontline troops in Russia right now. In fact, isn't that the guy in Siberia that ended up getting pissed off because of the recruitment? So he ended up shooting up a bunch of people in Siberia. They're walking away from Russia. So Snowden needs to. He's a traitor and a coward. Traitor and coward. And I'll tell you, that sucker will never set foot in the United States. I tell you again.
Chris,
other than that, I have no feelings about the guy. So.
Chris, with all due respect, do you understand the major difference between Trump and Snowden is only one? Trump has no idea how to use Flash. Or anything, so he couldn't. He physically couldn't do something what Snowden did. Other than that, I don't care about either of them. They're both traitors. So they all both have to be. Not even killed.
That's good.
Simply killed. I wish there would be a guillotine right across White House in Washington, and both of them would be decimated. Really. Although it was in Trump, because he's in the West, not wanting to escape. I never heard about his plans to escape somewhere to Siberia or else. So
There
he
you
has
go.
much better chances to be prosecuted. That's true.
There you go, folks. There you go. There you have it.
Oh, by the way, one more thing. Speaking about
Please.
what happened in Siberia, Chris, are you
Yeah.
aware what an uprising happened in Russia in the last few days regarding the mobilization? This is huge. This regime could collapse now anytime, simply because now the women of Russia, they moved forward, especially in some republics like Dagestan and some others. They move forward. They want to save their husbands, brothers,
Sons.
sons, and so on. They don't want to give it for nothing to Putin, so he will send it as just a meat to be going through Ukrainian systems. And some of them, they're thinking, okay, some people went on their own to this the offices of Russian army to be conscripted. So they went, they together, and they having a good time. They had a few beers here and there. So they said, so okay, so we'll go to Ukraine. Ukraine is a nice country. So we'll go to some villages, we'll pick up some vodka, and we'll have a good time, or so on. And one of them asking, have you ever heard about HIMARS and what it does? So one looked and said, HIMARS? It's some kind of a Jewish sound name. Who is that?
Yeah.
The guy said, you'll find out real soon. And if not you, then your mother will pick up whatever remains of them. But there are not too many remains. Once you will be killed by HIMARS, there is nothing really to see anymore.
Yeah.
There will be nothing out of you. You'll be just gone. You will disappear to the better world. And I've heard some lately Ukrainian sources and very high placed. For example, Aristovich, who is an advisor to Office of the President of Ukraine. He, in Russian language, he made a direct approach to Russian people who are now being.
Oh yeah, I heard.
You heard about that?
Yeah. He said,
He said,
"Hey, you surrender. You come on in. You know, you can. We'll treat you as, we won't treat you like prisoners. We'll treat you as brothers. You come on back in." I mean, it's a very lucrative invitation. Like, hey, drop your weapon, or just don't. Hey, just give it to us. And we'll just move on.
But one important thing is, he said, first of all, while you're still in Russia, run away, hide, go to other countries, do anything impossible not to be sent to Ukrainian front.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Number two option is that you are coming to Ukraine. Number one, run immediately and to become a prisoner of war. You will be treated well.
Yep.
You will be with dignity, like we are doing that so far. Unlike Russians, by the way, because if you should see this 200 fighters that were released recently, they were all in horrible shape, beaten, broken.
Now, what is the more? That's
Finally, let me finish. Finally, option number 3. Once you start combat against Ukraine, you will not be taken as prisoner. You will be killed. Our aim from now on is to kill as many Russian fighters as possible. No prisoners are being taken. So this is your options: being killed, go to become a prisoner of war, or hide somewhere in Russia, or run away, go through the Mongolian border on your foot.
They're doing, yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. Yeah. That's a real situation there.
Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No. I just was curious as to the morale in Russia now. I mean, protests. Do you think Putin's in danger of any kind of a coup or assassination, or do you think in this situation, you have one man that's in charge of the entire country? I mean, there is no, even though you might have a Duma and you have all that, unilaterally, this guy can do anything he wants. So is there any hope? I mean, the morale of the troops seems to be down. He's going to continue to do this. He's now going to annex these other provinces. So that way he can say you're encroaching on my territory. So Sasha, where is this going?
Simple, Steve. It's not so simple. Even if he is, for all practical purposes, he's dictator, but even dictators, they need a variety of support from his closest friends and then further on. Right now, Putin, lately, he created so many enemies of his. Let's start with army. His army wanted, once there was a decision about war against Ukraine, whether it's a just war or not just war, but the generals are generals. Their profession is to fight. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to quickly make a disable attack against Kyiv, all other major cities, and win this war really quickly, regardless of the sacrifices of Ukrainian people, and in some cases Russians as well. But they don't count how many Russians would be killed. Let's say 100,000, million, or 10 million. It's no difference to them. Women will get more babies and so on. It doesn't matter. Now, Putin didn't want to do it that way. He wanted to do a hybrid war, sort of his, it's not even a war, it's a special operation. So what makes a difference between special operation and war? Well, major difference is that in case of war, you have to declare a special military situation within the country. So now all country knows that the country is at war, and they have to do something about it. And mobilization would be just an integral part of going to war. But Putin didn't want to make Ukraine a so important country that Russia started a war against Ukraine, which is, in his opinion, shouldn't even exist. Also, how you explain to Russians that we start war against Ukraine? What Ukraine is always been part of larger Russia. They speak almost the same language. Well, a lot of Ukrainians actually speak Russian, and those who speak Ukrainian, they know both Ukrainian and Russian. And Ukrainian is a very close language phonetically, grammatically, in every which way to Russian. And Putin declared that Ukrainians are our brothers. So how you start war and explain it to your own people that you start war against your brothers? Impossible task. So now he wanted to do hybrid war. We know what's happened. The Ukrainians fighters, they were becoming stronger each day, each week, each month. And now there is a complete impasse there. Nobody can move forward. Ukrainians can do, they can mount some attacks. Simply, first of all, they're getting more and more weapons from the West and US in particular. Second of all, they know the territory very well. They have excellent intelligence. So if anybody can move forward at this point, it's Ukrainians. Russians have no idea. Now, their idea of mobilization, it's nothing but disaster. People don't want to be mobilized. They're hiding. They're escaping. They're burning this point where they're trying to collect them, and those military offices. So this is becoming really complete disaster. Now the referendums, nobody in the world will recognize all this phony and real sham referendums. Not, I wouldn't even use the word of referendums because, well, you remember 8 years ago when they annexed Crimea. What kind of referendums were there? Under the machine guns, they were ordering people to come. Whom are you going to vote? And they had to loudly say, we want to be part of Russia. So it wasn't even a normal referendum.
Yes. Well, you know what? Well, and real quickly, with Sasha, let's go real quickly, a shift into the number that I just gave about the college debt relief. But that goes to
400 billion.
Yes. Is there just the critics advocates say that there's just too much money going in the system. So you add 400 billion to 1.3 trillion, then I'm losing count of the money. And Sasha, you run a show, Modern Investing. I mean, does this much of supply of money
But
go into the fact that it's driving more inflation? I'm going to start with Sasha.
Go ahead.
I'm having a hard time getting arms around that.
It's a very difficult question. First of all, is inflation the bigger enemy than recession? Never mind depression, but even recession. It's very unclear, and sometimes you can have both. Sometimes you can have only, for example, a recession without any inflation whatsoever, and you have inflation without recession. So these are very, very difficult situation to analyze. Number two, with overall U.S. debt, declared and undeclared, if you're looking at trillions, tens of trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars. So what the $400 billion or even $4 trillion or any other number, unless it's say $50 trillion, I would be alarmed, or $100 trillion. But this little thing like $400 billion, it does not change anything whatsoever for the United States. On the bigger picture, it's nothing. And about possibility of U.S. going bankrupt, the same question was asked by Warren Buffett several years ago, and he said, "How is the country, the only one in the world that can print U.S. dollars, can go bankrupt? Impossible." It's just impossible. It will just print more and more dollars. And as long as dollars are in demand, and all these days, look at even today, the dollar is in demand. Everybody, especially like in the wartime or a difficult time whatsoever, US dollars always will be in demand.
Well, that's interesting to know. And I just wanted to, bring that up, folks. I mean,
But
this is criticism of just, that's the argument. We're going to
but
find out
Steve,
soon, right?
Steve,
5 weeks, we'll find out whether that's going to cost the Democrats the election on
I don't think
November.
it'll cost the Democrats the election. If anything, it might help because at some point, there are so many people that have defaulted on their loans and are definitely not losing any kind of sleep or anything along those lines with those kind of loan situations. And definitely a lot of folks are still in debt 20 or 30 years after getting into college and all along those lines. So I definitely think that there is a massive need for people to have that just forgiven because they have not had any, it's impacted their personal economies, but also the economies of the nation. So I definitely don't see why that is a big issue. And I think that it is something that should have been done a long time ago. But that's just my thoughts. Maybe Chris has a disagreement with me on that.
Well, I mean, Mark, look, I don't have any problem with giving and literally we are giving money to individuals that are trying to pay down their loans. If they're trying to pay down their loans, of course, give them help. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But for an individual that has not put any money into their loans, and all of a sudden, because of whatever reason, and then we give them $10,000. Now, the thing is, it's taxable. So I just thought that was very ironic that we're giving them money to basically increase the tax rolls so we can get revenue. It's very interesting how that's going to add to their income. So I'm going to take that $10,000, put it towards, thank you very much. They're still going to get $10,000 out of their income. So it may not help them as much as they think it's going to help them. But hey,
I guess my argument is that if you are having that kind of money that is weighing you down, it's like many other things. Many corporations will have money that is weighing them down as well. And you eradicate that, then it is a way to relieve that weight that is on many folks' backs and all along those lines. So like I said, if you don't have to face that debt, if you're not facing the threat of defaults, if you're not facing any of that, then you can use that money that you would have been trying to maneuver to get to the government into more necessary living costs, whether that is housing, whether that is food, whether that is a lot of the other very basic necessities. And that's why I was saying that there are a lot of folks that are probably like several $1,000s, if not tens and hundreds of $1,000s in debt, that if that is not on their back, it makes it easier for them to actually have basic living necessities and all in that space.
Well, I think basically what's happened is, and this is interesting, is that it's given people a false sense of security. I've heard I've heard people on the radio basically state, "Oh, now I can go buy a house, and now I can go buy a car." Now I can really $10,000 is going to help you to get there. I can't even imagine that happening. But if you think you can get a car as a result of getting $10,000, which is going to add to your income, I think that you probably should go back to financial school. In fact, go to Sasha Starr's financial, and find out exactly what $10,000 is and how much that's going to take you. Even if you use it for rent. So I think there's a lot of situations here where people just don't understand that $10,000 is just not that big of a deal. I mean, Steve will tell you if the situation exists where $10,000, Steve, what does $10,000 give you from the standpoint of political clout? If I have $10,000, how much can I buy in political clout from that? If I give you $10,000 to help you with your campaign or anybody with a campaign, about how long is that $10,000 going to last? Is that going to last you a good bit?
Just to put it in perspective, to win my last race, which actually I led the ticket, so I probably ran for the wrong office, but I raised $46,000. And that actually, but you can burn through that money pretty quick. $10,000 doesn't really buy you a lot of mail to mail out. this stuff adds up. I mean, so $10,000 is important, but literally, it depends what level. At the state level, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. At the U.S. Senate level, $15 to $20 million, right? Governor, right around there. And for the U.S. presidency, you're looking at about $1 billion.
Easily.
And so it's amazing, right? And take a look at Joe Manchin, for example. And we didn't talk about it today, but I need to research it. But I tried to get a meeting with him last week, couldn't get it. Hopefully, get on the calendar next month. But he's now leading a legislation, I think, that's really focusing more on helping fossil fuel companies. But why is he doing that? Well, if he's going to run for president, if he's going to run for the U.S. Senate, if he's going to run for governor, he's going to need the money of big coal. So, and he's got to pivot now to do something because he voted for the climate change deal, right? So it's amazing how that answers your question, right? Your decisions and policies will be shaped by those that give you money. I did take money from some developers. I gave some money back because I did not feel like it was the right thing to do for me to take money from developers, and to that whole experience, which was turned negative against me during the campaign. I actually, as long as I'm on the city council, I will no longer take money from developers. And I actually think that we need to pass an ordinance in all cities to make it easier. Because in this instance, I received a check online and wasn't aware that contribution came in. But because I'm transparent to the public, I felt like I had to report it to the Board of Elections because the money came in. I didn't want to return the money. And then let's say somebody took a screenshot of the check and they came in, they said, Steve never told us this. I got reelected. So I think the voters actually gave me credit, but that was a bad experience. And I think, but I hope that answers your question. I think that we need to get better at being honest with the public.
Better accountability is what it sounds like you're talking about, Chris, and everything. And in that same line and all along those lines, we definitely got to have better accountability. And even to Chris's point, there were people that got that funds when COVID first started, and they burned through it very quickly, and that was not a lot of money either. So I do hear what you're saying, Chris, that a lot of folks will get that money and think of it as an immediate windfall and just kind of like burn through it the way that lottery winners oftentimes burn through their money and all of that. So I definitely hear your point, and it is one that folks should take heed to, and we definitely need more folks that are doing fiscal management and things of that nature. Hey, I know you're getting ready to wind down. I think Sasha's got a point he wants to make really quickly and everything, but I was going to just mention very fastly that two other quick news stories that we might want to talk about tomorrow are gerrymandering is back in the news. Apparently, Eric Holder, the former attorney general, is concerned about some of what the Supreme Court may do with gerrymandering that could influence the national elections and all along those lines. And it's a North Carolina case that they are looking at. So that is something that might impact a lot of the races, not just here, but around the world. And I know that Sasha's going to do his Russia, Ukraine, China show, and apparently Meta has shut down the covert influence campaigns that they say were run from China and Russia. So they're saying that those covert campaigns were coming around. So Meta, also the new name for Facebook and everything, is saying that they are shutting those down. And apparently China's growth is going to fall behind the rest of Asia for the first time since 1990. So it looks like China's growth is not as big as it used to be. And now I'll toss it to either Sasha or
real quick, Sasha, because we only have a minute left. Oh, Sasha left. Okay. Well, here's my final take. I'm going to go ahead and close out, and I'm going to begin my monologue tomorrow in honor of his career. But this weekend at the Laver Cup, which is the competition hosted by Rod Laver and John McEnroe coached the Team World, and there was the Team Europe, we got to see for the very last time Roger Federer grace the world with his presence on the tennis court. How fitting it was that he played alongside his nemesis and rival, but also friend, Rafael Nadal. It was an emotional moment as Federer lost the doubles match and broke down in tears, with many of his compatriots on the court going in the tears, including Rafa Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and all of the greatest players from around the world. It was an amazing thing to see that in a time of divisiveness and turbulence across the political spectrum, we can see the greatest of athletes coming together, along with the rest of us in the world, to honor such a graceful champion. As Andy Andrews told me recently, an artist. How many times we saw Federer hit a graceful one-hand backhand on the lawn or grass of Wimbledon, his one French Open, the numerous U.S. Open titles and Australian Open titles he won, hoisting Grand Slam championships over atop his head 21 times, and arguably putting himself down as one of the greatest champions to ever grace the sport of tennis. As the Tina Turner song that I attributed to Serena Williams, simply the best, better than all the rest, I think it's fair to say that yes, Roger Federer was one of the best tennis players in the world, but he was also a graceful humanitarian, a class act, a wonderful father and son and husband, but most importantly, a steward of championships, courage, heart, attitude, motivated all the time, perseverant, innovative, optimistic, and never giving up. Those are the words of the Carrie Underwood song, Invincible. But Roger, you were a champion. You're a champion who won our hearts, and you were a champion of the world. We look forward to reminiscing a little bit tomorrow about your wonderful career. I do hope you come out of retirement like Tom Brady and make a return, perhaps playing doubles with Rafa Nadal. That would be a sight to see. But we wish you and your wife Mirka and your children all the best as you now will move on to the next phase of your life. We're proud of you. We look forward to many great memories and insights from the blocks, maybe with John McEnroe. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best on World Edition. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another great edition, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you all so much.